how quickly are we moving away from animal products? I think that's the not the $1 million business, but the $100 billion question that everyone's trying to figure out. We spoke to so many interesting companies in the alternative meat, alternative animal product space. We're able to feature quite a few here as well. So I'm personally very excited for this session. And we do have a poll question up right now to get that conversation going. If you haven't submitted your answer, go ahead and do so right now so that the panel can use that. With that, I'll turn it over to Ron Meeusen, our moderator for this session. Ron.
Thank you, Nick. Well, we're going to start with introductions so you know who's speaking. I'm a revamped botanist. I spent 25 years running corporate R&D in large food and ag companies before I leapt to the dark side and raised a food and ag venture fund 15 years ago. And now we're in our third fund. We've got an excellent panel here of people today who are very close to probably closer than any of us to the movement into alternatives. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, starting with Gareth.
Hey everyone, Gareth Asten here. I'm a co-founder and managing partner at Acre Venture Partners. We invest across the food value chain, primarily seed and Series A, based here in Los Angeles, not too far down the street from one of my other panelists here, Phil. Our primary thesis is really around better outcomes in both human health and environmental health. To tip my hand, I guess, just a touch, we've looked at a lot of companies in the all protein space. We made one investment in that space, and so it'll be interesting to hear what the other panelists have to say, but certainly have a very specific point of view on it. So,
thank you. Laura, would you like to tell a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Zaim. I'm currently a director at Louis Dreyfus Company Innovations, which is the corporate venture capital arm of Louis Dreyfus Company and 180-year-old international agricultural commodities trader. We recently launched the program about a year ago and have a couple of investments under our belt I'll be happy to talk about a little more. And prior to joining LDC, I worked both in venture capital in alternative proteins at New Crop Capital, and also on the more entrepreneurial side, helping launch a food brand that was a portfolio company there, and then my own startup prior to that. So, really happy to bring sort of experience for both sides of the table, and absolutely love working in the food and ag industry.
Great. Phil?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Phil Erlanger. I'm a co-founder and managing partner of Pontifax Ag Tech down the road from Gareth, as he noted. And we're a growth capital investor across the food and ag technology sector, and that's all we do. And we have not yet made an alt protein investment, but we're convinced about the broad opportunity and looking actively and thinking about it hard. So look forward to the discussion. Nice to meet everyone.
Great. And last, Scott May from Mista. Well, we can hear you, Scott, so why don't you start while they're trying to get...
Excellent. Well, hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Scott May, the head of Mista. And for those of you who don't know what Mista is, it's an innovation platform. We're located in San Francisco. We were funded by Givaudan, the world's largest flavor company that's been around for about 250 years. I've been with Givaudan for 33 years, food science background. And really as an innovation platform, our purpose is to help transform the global food system to meet the needs of the future. And we do that through a combination of corporate members. So to date, we have Givaudan, of course, Danone, Mars, Christian Hansen, AAK, and Ingredion, with several more coming on here shortly. And then we have a number of startup early stage companies that are disrupting everything in the food system that we're connected with, and we support these early stage companies as they grow and scale, both on the technology and ingredient side, but also on the CPG finished product side. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you. So the topic today is not whether alternatives to animal protein are growing, but how fast and how far. And this is an interesting question. When we tried to plan this session, one of the things we realized very quickly is that, you know, the precedent, the closest precedent is alternative milks. And if we ask how long did that take? Well, you know, the first, while it was 20 billion globally alternatives to milk last year, the first US acknowledgement of alternatives to milk was in a USDA report back in 1897. So one could look at it and say North America took, you know, over a century to get to 15–20% market share in that market. Or you could go all the way back to the 13th century in the Levant when soy milk was invented. You could make it longer still. But clearly things are moving faster, driven by a wide range of factors. I mean, there's, you know, concern about livestock impacts on climate change. There are concerns on human nutrition and health. There are concerns on antibiotic use. There are concerns on the proper waste treatment from large confined feeding operations and you know, properly dealing with feces and side effects. There are concerns about animal welfare, and there are increasingly concerns not just about the feces that comes out of large CAFOs, but the methane. So there's a wide range of these things, but at the same time, societies have always been very culturally tied to their foods. So one can sometimes, one wouldn't be surprised to find that there's resistance and there are headwinds to slow this up. So what we decided to do was start by asking, of all of these drivers and potential anchors that could speed up the movement or slow up the movement, we've decided to go around the panel and ask each of them to pick one driver and one potential threat or tailwind that they think we need to be watching, which will be determinant or largely determinant of how quickly the US market, we're going to start with the US market just because the world is too complex for a 40-minute panel, but how quickly or not they feel the US will move away from animal meat to animal alternatives. Maybe we'll start with Laura.
Sure, definitely an advantage in going first so that no one else could take my drivers. No, but happy to share some thoughts. So I definitely think actually that the most impactful driver for adoption of meat alternatives is quite simply demographic change. Just in the past 2 years, you know, millennials have surpassed baby boomers as the largest living adult US population. And Gen Zs have started to enter adulthood. They have jobs, they have disposable income. And I think it's critical to remember that both of these generations were kind of the first two to grow up with this idea that business can and should be a force for social change. And so have become really sort of value-based buyers, and they express those values in how they buy their food as well. And then it's not controversial to say that, you know, purchasing power can drive systemic change in industry and in the food and ag industry in particular. And so when you combine this demographic shift, this change in sort of the locus of purchasing power in the United States with this sort of a value-based consumerism, or value-based approach to consumption, and then you layer on two generational trends that I see, and I think that we would most see, right? Health and wellness is a big concern. And mitigating climate change is sort of another very big generational concern that is very high amongst the sort of younger generations. When you layer all those factors together, I see, you know, sort of the perfect opportunity for rapid adoption and acceptance of plant meat alternatives, or moving away from sort of a traditional meat-based diet. So that would be my answer, just simple old demographic change, but I think that has real lasting power, right? Like remember 5 years ago when I started investing in the space, I always would get the question, oh, is plant-based just a fad? Is plant-based just a trend? And those questions have started to die off.
What would you see as the,
Oh, yeah.
if we go out 10 years, 20 years, and it hasn't happened, and that this trend has slowed, what do you think is likely to be the biggest cause of that?
Yeah, so a big challenge that I see with the sort of introduction and development of alt meat technologies and novel proteins are the infrastructure scaling challenges that I think are unique to the food and ag supply chain. You know, at LDC, as a very well-established middle of the supply chain player, you know, we understand better than most the challenges of moving, transporting, processing, and risk handling these ag supply chains. And I think that many of the startups that we meet with don't really have a full appreciation for just how high the barrier to entry into the existing food and ag supply chain is. You know, they will need to be reliant on other players. They will need to plug into upstream and downstream processes and standardizations. And they should account for how the incumbents, you know, like soy and pea might react and continue to be optimized like they have been for the past, you know, 50 years. I think a good parallel is hemp, actually. You know, the hemp crop, right, shows that even tremendous margins on the consumer side, you know, groundswell sort of adoption, you know, getting farmers to plant the crop, which is no small feat in of itself. Even having those hasn't sort of smoothed out the issues of the middle of the supply chain, where there's no standardized machinery, no standardized drying and processing and handling, and crop genetics are still sort of unstable. So you get a lot of variance in crops, right? And novel proteins, I think, will face similar solutions as they scale. So as long as those challenges are sort of underappreciated or misunderstood, I think innovation will be slower to market and adoption of these products will be slower than it could be.
Great. Who'd like to go next? All right, then I only wait 4 seconds and then I nominate someone. Phil, you're up.
Okay. The macro drivers to me are sustainability, ESG, and a sense of imperative that people have, both as consumers, which I think is the ultimate driver, and capital providers. I mean, the cost of capital to enter and the barriers to entry have dropped significantly thanks to technology, are creating, you know, very rapidly accumulating universe of startups, you know, many of them extremely thoughtful and interesting, but like other segments we've seen in this sector, things can, you know, get crowded quickly, and that'll be one of the challenges, obviously. And the other is the actual consumer preferences. The all protein sector is in its early days. It's about replicating animal meat or animal products, and there's a potential here that over time consumer tastes really evolve to involve different form factors for food, and people start to take protein on in different forms, so you're not really hostage to a burger, much less a steak or a piece of tuna, and if you get to that, you could just see a redefinition of protein in a way that also adds to the adoption.
Interesting, Phil. You conjure up the image of a future food that tastes like a steak but looks like a carrot.
Yeah, or maybe it doesn't taste like a steak. Maybe it tastes like, tofu and looks like a, piece of broccoli, whatever. But yeah,
but you make a good point. We could untether the flavors from the food form.
Yeah,
because of interesting.
I think so, and I think we're all hostage to kind of all protein is fake, animal-based food that we're just historically familiar with. So if you get to a point where that starts to get challenged, that could redefine the sector, I think, in a pretty explosive way. And then, you know, I personally think the challenges are, I'd run to Laura's comment, you know, or parlay off of it, you know, on the demographic side. I mean, all protein consumption today is kind of the proverbial, you know, US white coastal elite kind of consumption base, which is teeny. And it, you know, the correlation with demographics, industrial, regional, educational kind of factors are all pretty real. And I think we're still in the early days, and it will be driven by the mass markets for adoption. If you're going to get to scale where things are really a legitimate economic alternative to the animal supply chain, and you've got taste, texture, price all kind of lining up, there needs to be a massive increase in consumption at the scale level to enable that. It's just a lot of capex to go drive those kind of achievements to make it all happen. So there's a lot of education, a lot of adoption.
Yeah, goes interesting. So you agree with Laura on that the scaling and the amount of capex required for the infrastructure could be a big barrier, but you see the demographics, which she saw as the biggest driver, as potentially limiting if the consumer preferences don't extend beyond the wealthier, younger professional class. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe the bridge to marry the two perspectives is probably regulation or something that says we need to do this, people. You know, we cannot have 1.5 degrees of incremental global warming, and methane or whatever it is a big problem, and we just cannot, you know, drive consumption in the same way. So I tend to think the demographics are more of a timeline issue where there's some forcing functions that will bring it along. And so I agree with Laura fundamentally, but I think it's a timing issue that needs to be kind of factored into probably the second question you're going to ask us.
Yeah. Okay. We'll come back to the second question. Scott, would you like to share your perspectives on the biggest, what you think is likely to be the biggest driver and likely to be the biggest anchor?
Sure. Thanks, Ron. Yeah, and I'm gonna start, I think, with the headwinds and pile on with what Phil and Laura just said, which is scale. But I'm going to talk about it in two pieces. One is scale at the finished product side, and then the other is scale at the ingredient side. So if we look at the CPG side, you know, one of the technologies that we see that brings that taste and texture more on parity with a traditional animal product is high moisture extrusion. And the availability of high moisture extrusion is very limited. I mean, each one of these machines is $1.5 million. It's going to cost you somewhere in the neighborhood of $400 million to build a plant. So it is super capital intense. And if you're an early stage startup and you have a plant-based burger that you want to bring to market, you don't walk out and just call up the co-man down the street that has high moisture extruder. It doesn't exist. So I think that's one of the barriers of entry that we see. Of course, you can use TVPs and that kind of thing, which gets you partway there. But if you really want to produce high quality products, you have to go to high moisture extrusion. We'll see other technologies coming on board, which is really exciting as well. But for that, we're going to need a lot of private equity to invest into scale, and we're starting to see that. Venture capital is more interested. You know, they're not really interested in tying up their capital for that long. So we need a combination of private equity and venture working together. Then, if we talk about the ingredient side, you know, one of the challenges we have with new ingredients coming on is the time it takes to get these things to scale and to be meaningful is a very long time. And for many venture funds, it's just not interesting. And so we have to find different ways to fund these new technologies and new ingredients that are coming to market. And so I think that's a headwind, but also a great opportunity to figure out some of those solutions. And then, so for me, that's really the headwind. The tailwind that I see is in looking at new ingredients and new technologies that we see almost every day. And some of these are actual at a big enough scale to make a difference. So that's one of the challenges we see. You know, right now you can use soy, you can use pea, you can use vital wheat gluten, but then after that it drops off very, very steeply in terms of what ingredients are you going to use to formulate your products. And if we don't bring other ingredients to the market, we're going to wind up in the same problem where we are, you know, seeing large industrial scale agriculture that is not really helpful for the planet. And you know, we have acres and acres and acres of pea and soy grown in ways that are not really helpful. But we see examples of that are, I think, really interesting. So somebody like a Treviva, who's bringing Pangamia oil and protein to the market, which is really interesting. They've been working at it for a long time, and they're going to be at scale pretty quickly. So it's those kinds of companies, I think, that give me hope in seeing some of these new ingredients and technologies. And then, of course, when you talk about cell ag and some of the other things that we see, all of that combined gives me hope that that in the near-ish future, we will see some substantial shift in consumers moving to alternative solutions.
It's very interesting you use Treviva as an example, Scott, because I'm an example of exactly what you said. We looked at them in for our last fund, and we liked everything about them except the liquidation was too long for a 10-year venture fund. It was perfect example.
Exactly. We have to find solutions for that.
Gareth? Have we left you any interesting territory, or have we stolen all your thunder by this point?
Yeah, no, I do have a slightly different take, although I do agree with the majority of what everyone else has said. I mean, it's worth emphasizing that, and we say this all the time, and you know, invest up and down the supply chain, that everything starts and stops with the consumer, period, right? And so you can make the best widget in the world, but if it's not priced correctly and it's not accessible, broadly speaking, it actually doesn't matter at the end of the day. And so, you know, with that, I would take a slightly different shift. And while demographic, I think, is important, what I think is slightly more important is the psychographic changes, right? And so as more information is available, and certainly there have been major shifts in the last couple of decades with the advent of the internet and being able to understand things around, having more access to data around things about nutrition and the environment. You know, we're in a completely different place from where the consumer is, from where they were, 15 or 20 years ago. And so I would also say that kind of inside of those psychographic shifts, what, at least in my mind, kind of priorities, in the three kind of major buckets are certainly, number one, around the environment, number two, around, human health. And then I would put, third, and probably way third, is, animal welfare. And the reason I rank them like that and think that those are kind of the big drivers is more to have to do with what I'm observing in kind of consumption patterns on the human health side with respect to alternative proteins. And that is that, you have what I would consider, I think what everyone considers, the largest, certainly the most prominent alt protein platforms that are, in the market today, in Beyond, certainly number one, and Impossible number two behind that. But at the end of the day, the only reason they've been successful is I shouldn't say the only reason, but a primary driver has not been health. I mean, they're not healthy products. They're not good for you. And really the only kind of big benefit from eating a Beyond or Impossible burger is the the environmental side of it. So, you know, you follow the little bouncy ball and what consumers are actually doing, and it's a reflection, I think, of kind of the reality of where we are today. The only other thing that I'll say on the tailwind side that I think will be important is just this idea of accessibility. I mean, we talk about this a lot, you know, internally, and it means a lot of things. And I think it's kind of embedded in what everyone else has said. But accessibility is, you know, incredibly important. It can't, you know, product can't just cater to, you know, the 1%. And so at the end of the day, you know, pricing is everything. And, you know, as with some of the other panelists, I'm very excited about some of the products that are coming to market. Not the least of which is one of the ones that's in our portfolio, where pricing is very, very accessible because the cost of production, cost of capital is incredibly low on a relative basis to, you know, many of these other platforms, whether it's the, you know, the extrusion process or the, you know, some of the other, you know, cell ag processes that are incredibly capital intensive. So those are kind of the tailwinds. I would say on the barrier side, at the end of the day, I think it's simply one thing. I think it's cultural. We as a society, and I know we're not supposed to talk globally, but globally for sure, protein and how we think about protein and where our protein comes from is such a cultural kind of experience, and something that is so embedded in kind of who we are. That, I think, frankly, is the hardest thing to overcome. I think that when you ask somebody to give up and change something that is so part of how they identify themselves, you know, and that doesn't come through education. Well, it might slightly come through education, but it's not an easy barrier to overcome. The other things I think are very tactical, but this is a very emotional thing to ask somebody, you know, especially as we think about some of those larger hurdles that we're going to talk about, you know, in terms of penetration. But it's a big part, I think, of you know, one of the tougher barriers that's hard to quantify and certainly hard to change.
Gareth, do you want to mention the portfolio company, the name of the portfolio company, what they do that you used as an example for the listeners?
Yeah, there's a couple of companies in this space, but obviously we think they're the best. That's Meaty. And so they're using mycelium as the product to create various meat analogs. And so steak, chicken, whole cuts of steak, whole cuts of chicken, and fish as well.
Great. Yeah, I can't help but interject here. You mentioned the cultural attachment people have to foods and food forms and flavors. At one point, I took over a vegetable breeding program on several continents, and one of the breeders was a squash breeder in North America. And when I visited him, he explained to me that there were two types of small, thin, long squash in North America. There's crookneck, where it comes up and bends at the top, and straight neck. And he explained that north of the Mason-Dixon line, you can only sell straight neck. South of Mason-Dixon line, you can only sell crookneck, because that's what people were accustomed to. And I asked them, well, how do they cook it? And they all immediately slice it into this identical little cross sections. But you know, that's the way their parents and grandparents and great grandparents saw squash, and if it wasn't what they knew, it would not sell. So it's hard to predict and to overestimate the cultural component you mentioned. Thank you all. Well, you covered a lot of ground here. Maybe we could take a minute now. Nick, can we share the perceptions on the survey of the audience as to how long they think it would take? And we limited this question to North America because we thought it'd be too complicated otherwise.
There you go.
Okay, so here it is. Only 8% think it'll happen in the next 10, it'll hit the 50% mark in the next 10 years. 29% in 15, 40% think it'll take over a quarter century, and 1 out of 5 feel it's just never going to hit parity with livestock-based meat. That's interesting. Let's go around the horn. I'd be interested in your reactions, and maybe we'll go in reverse order. Gareth, why don't you lead off?
Yeah.
What's your best guess and why?
So I said 25 plus years, and you know, I think I've already talked about what some of the barriers are and some of the tailwinds. And I think those are all contributing factors. So I won't take a bunch of time because I know we don't have much. But what I will say is that I think that there are a couple of things that could accelerate, and I would classify them as shocks to the system. So. You know, mad cow disease is an easy one to point to, you know, but I'm sure there are others that we don't even know about that would force consumers to move away for safety reasons, right? And the second one is one that Phil mentioned, which is regulatory, right? I mean, if there is something that is that moves the market relative to, you know, pricing and creates a much more accessible product because of market demands, because of regulatory kind of infrastructure or regulatory changes that change, you know, pricing of infrastructure and the pricing to the consumer, then those that could accelerate it. But I'm definitely think it's more than 25 years before we're there.
Scott, what's your best guess? And we're going to need to move quickly because we want to leave a few minutes for questions.
So I guess I'm a bit more optimistic because I think of the shock force drivers in that, and you know, as a human race, we can't wait 25 years to make a change. Now, I don't believe by one stretch that we're going to remove all animals. We can't. We need animals in our agriculture system. We need to do it in the right way. But when we talk about fish and in our oceans, we are in a world of hurt. And if we don't figure out solutions to, you know, so I mean, for me, there is the land animal discussions, which is usually where we're focused. But if we focus ourselves into the fish, that to me is where the opportunity has to go. We have to figure out a way to stop overfishing. I mean, there's simply not going to be fish left to fish. No. So for me, there's some things I think that whether it's, you know, regulatory, governmental, everything, we need to push in this direction, and also technologies that we're all seeing, and there's a lot more investment coming in. So for me, I'm quite optimistic in this space that we're going to see a change in less than 25 years.
Great. Phil? Oh, you're muted, Phil.
I'm having a bad Zoom morning, sorry. So, yeah, I'm 2050 plus for getting there, but I do think there's a good shot of it. I think the key, you know, dominoes to fall are some of the things we talked about before, the concern over sustainability, ESG, but I think the whole process of altering the supply chain, refinement and scaling to a point of economics and the experience of it. I think regulation is a long-term forcing function, but I think, as we all know in this sector, it's also a short to intermediate term break on anything innovative and going to be frustrating. But I think the whole carbon driven dynamic will certainly be there. You know, I do believe the vast majority of things that people eat and enjoy today have an alternative protein substitute that will ultimately become, you know, good enough or even great and drive replacement. I think it's when, not if, but I think when is long term. You know, you got to get to the experience of it, the economics of it, and then that has to become like a mass value-based alternative to get there. So I'll pause there.
Great. Laura?
Yeah. Sorry, my biggest takeaway from that survey was that 80% of the audience thinks that it will happen, right? That we will reach 50-50 parity. And I think asked that question 10 years ago and you might have gotten laughed out of the room, right? So I think that's pretty impressive in terms of the cultural mind shift, right? Approach to food, everything we've been discussing. And agree with all of the earlier points, but I would just like to throw out there, like, what is going to be plant-based meats Oatly moment, right? Like Oatly came in after soy, after almond, the plant-based milk industry was growing, right? Technologies were being developed. And I mean, I know Oatly's been around as a company for very long, but they really hit the market 5 years ago. Again, oat milk wasn't a thing. Now they're eyeing a $10 billion IPO, right? So there is still room for that level of innovation, I believe, in the plant-based meat market that could wipe what we currently have, you know, off the markets. So I'm excited to see that. Oh, and my answer was in 15 years.
Okay. You're channeling your inner Pollyanna, but she has reasons to be optimistic. I'm just going to take the moderator's option to mention two things that did not come up. First of all, I'm amazed at the insights. These are wonderful, most of which I hadn't been thinking about. What I didn't hear, and it struck me, was as a possible headwind, public consumer perception of these as processed and unnatural as opposed to natural. And that's something I wonder whether that will slow up the adoption. The other is there's still a fairly strong affinity for the small farmer and the small farm. And these alternatives tend, with a few exceptions, tend to replace small farms and replace, no one's going to shed a tear over replacing corporate farms, but the small farmer, has a soft spot in the public's mind, especially in Europe. And so, but also here. So those will be interesting things. Well, unfortunately, Nick, Howard, I was trying to leave 5 minutes for questions. We've got 1 or 2 minutes at most, but if there are questions from the group.
There is a question, Ron, from Chris Vandenberg, who just spoke a moment ago, and he's clearly on the animal side, since obviously his software helps dairy farms. So, and his question comes with a background. So plant protein faces the same environmental challenges as the animal protein industry and is highly processed. Why is there so little investments in the supply chain of animal protein improvement?
Does anyone want to tackle that?
I think it's a great question and absolutely part of the solution. And, we're in a period of, I think, extraordinary market exuberance for plant and cell-based protein. And, if you think through it and work with kind of the inertia of the existing supply chain, there's a huge amount to do there.
Yeah. We do see quite a bit in the space. I mean, animal health is something that I think is really important. I will say that also that, one thing that can't be lost here, at least from a consumer standpoint, we're seeing this, I'm sure everyone's seeing this as well, but regenerative agriculture does include the animal and does include animal health and well-being, and it's part of the system. And so, we can't, even though there's no quote unquote technology behind, regenerative agriculture per se, it is certainly, I think a major driver in terms of the quality of meat and its impact on the environment. So,
yeah, right. By the way, I would tie this discussion to a couple of the other presentations that will be happening later today. On oceans, we're going to have a startup called Vertical Oceans, which is, basically a sustainable aquaculture company. So that'll be an interesting presentation. I hope you'll stay around for that. And, one of the questions that came up in our prep for the India Southeast Asia panel was, how does alt protein play in India? Which is a very interesting question, getting to your point about cultural issues. 30% of India is vegetarian to begin with. And one of the speakers, when I asked him that question, the answer was, it's a big nothing burger. Indians generally speaking have no desire to eat plant-based protein that tastes like meat. because either they don't want to eat meat to begin with, you know, they're vegetarians, they've never tasted meat in their lives, 30% of the population, or they want to eat meat, right? So, but anyway, so it's going to be quite a different story across the geographies. But I think we're pretty much out of time. Unfortunately, Victoria, I'm afraid maybe you can ask your question in the chat or in the other platforms. But we're going to have to move on. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great panel. We have another panel coming up right now quickly. So we'll be continuing the conversation. Thank you again.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Howard. Thanks,
Thank
Ron.
you.